Preface. We are unknown to ourselves, we men of science, and for good reason. Since we have never searched for ourselves, how should we ever find ourselves? Truly has it been said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Our treasure consists in the hives of our knowledge. It is to those hives that we, creatures of the air, are always returning, laden with the honey of the intellect. In our hearts we care for but one thing, to bring something home to the hive. As far as the rest of life with its so-called experiences is concerned, which of us has sufficient interest or sufficient time to devote to them? In our dealings with such affairs, we were, I fear, never entirely committed. Our heart is simply not there, and certainly not our attention. Rather, we are like someone whose divine distractions and reveries are shattered when the clock strikes 12. Suddenly awakened, the chimes still resounding in his ears, he asks himself, what hour now has just struck? Sometimes we too, afterwards, rub our ears, as it were, and in complete astonishment and embarrassment ask, what is it that we have just experienced? Further, who are we really? And count, after they have struck, all the 12 strokes of the clock of our experience, of our life, of our being, and alas, lose count. We must remain foreign and unknown to ourselves. We do not understand ourselves. We are bound to be mistaken about our nature. For us, the motto, each one is the furthest away from himself, holds good to all eternity. As far as ourselves are concerned, we are unknown. 2. My opinions concerning the origins and history of our moral prejudices, for they constitute the subject matter of this polemic, were expressed in a cursory and provisional way in that collection of aphorisms entitled Human All Too Human, a book for free spirits, begun in Sorrento during a winter which allowed me to pause and look back upon the vast and perilous tracts through which my thoughts, up to that time, had wandered. This took place in the winter of 1876-7. The opinions themselves, however, were formed during an earlier period of my life. In substance, they were the same opinions which I take up again in the following essays. Let us hope that they have improved with the passing of so much time, becoming clearer, more mature, more compelling, and more complete. The fact, however, that I still cling to them, that in the meanwhile they have become more coherent, organized, and systematic, strengthens my confidence that they must have occurred to me not in an isolated, capricious, or sporadic fashion, but have sprung from a common root, from a fundamental demand for knowledge, calling from my innermost depths, with a voice which has grown increasingly clearer and more insistent. That is the only state of affairs that is proper for a philosopher. We have no right to act individually. We must neither err individually nor hit upon the truth individually. Rather, just as a tree is bound to bear its fruit, so do our thoughts, our values, our affirmations, denials, stipulations spring from us, all dependent upon and related to one another, the testimony of one will, one health, one kingdom, one sun. Are they to your taste, these fruits of ours? But what does this matter to the trees? What does that matter to us, the philosophers? 3. Owing to an instinctive skepticism, which I confess reluctantly, concerning morality, or rather everything that has been extolled as such, a persistent skepticism which manifested itself early in my life, quite spontaneously and without precedent, and which was so out of character with my circumstances, my age and my family ancestry, that I should have been almost entitled to style it my a priori. My curiosity and my suspicion were eventually bound to lead me to the question of what was the true origin of our good and of our evil. Indeed, at the tender age of 13, the problem of the origin of evil had already vexed me. At an age when games and God divide one's heart, I devoted to that problem my first childish attempt at the literary game, my first philosophic essay. And as regards my juvenile solution of the problem, well, I quite properly gave the honor to God and made him the father of evil. Was this the solution my own a priori demanded of me? That new immoral, or at least amoral, a priori, and that categorical imperative which was its voice? But oh, how contrary to the Kantian article, and how pregnant with problems, to which since then I have given more and more attention, and indeed not merely attention. Fortunately, I soon had learned to distinguish theological from moral prejudice, and I gave up the search for a supernatural origin of evil. A modicum of historical and philological education, to say nothing of an instinctive appreciation for the subtleties of psychological questions, succeeded almost immediately in transforming my original problem into the following one. Under what conditions did man invent for himself those judgments of value, good and evil, and what intrinsic value do they possess in themselves? Have they up to the present advanced human welfare, or rather have they harmed our race? Are they a symptom of distress, impoverishment, and degeneration of life? Or, conversely, do we find in them an expression of the abundant vitality and vigor of life, its courage, its self-confidence, its future? On this point I found and ventured for myself the most diverse answers. I classified eras, nations, and individuals according to their position in a hierarchy. I became a specialist in my problem, and from my answers grew new questions, new investigations, new conjectures, new probabilities, until at last I had my own little realm, a whole secret world growing and flourishing, like a secret garden which no one must even suspect exists. Oh, how fortunate are we men of science, provided that we know how to remain silent until the time is ripe. Four. I owe my first impulse to publish some of my hypotheses concerning the origins of morality to a clear, well-written, and even precocious little book in which I encountered for the first time the most perverse and absurd sorts of genealogical hypotheses. These hypotheses were actually English in origin, and this fascinated me in the peculiar way that ideas diametrically opposed and antithetical to one's own always do. The title of the book was The Origin of Moral Sentiments. Its author, Dr. Paul Ree. The year of its appearance, 1877. I believe that I have never read anything in which every single proposition and conclusion has elicited so emphatic a denial on my part as did that book, though that denial was untainted by either pique or impatience. In the work previously mentioned, with which I was then occupied, I accordingly referred, more or less at random, to the arguments of his book, not so as to refute them, for what have I to do with mere refutations, but to offer, in a constructive spirit, as is only proper, a more probable theory for one which is improbable, and occasionally, no doubt, exchanging one philosophic error for another, It was in that early period that I gave, as I have said, the first public expression to those hypotheses regarding the origin of morality to which the present essays are devoted. But I did so clumsily and hesitantly, as I myself would be the first to admit, for I was still unsure of myself, lacking any sufficiently precise terminology of my own for these special subjects. I was likewise often liable to relapse and to vacillation. One should compare, in particular, what I say in Human or to Human, section 45, about the parallel early history of good and evil, namely their origin from the castes of the aristocrats and the slaves. Similarly, section 136 concerning the origins and value of moral asceticism, likewise sections 96 and 99, and volume 2, section 89, concerning the morality of custom, that far older and more original kind of morality, which is toto celo, different from the altruistic ethics in which Dr. Ree, like all the English moral historians, sees the ethical thing in itself. Likewise, section 92, the Wanderer and his Shadow, section 26, and the Dawn, section 112, concerning the origin of justice as a balance between persons of approximately equal power. Equilibrium as the prerequisite of all contracts, consequently of all law. Similarly, concerning the origin of punishment in The Wanderer and his Shadow, sections 22 and 23, which cannot be for the purpose of deterrence, as Dr. Ree asserts, for that is neither essential nor inherent. Rather, it is introduced only under certain particular circumstances, and is always something incidental, something added on. 5. Just at that time, though, I was occupied with something much more important than the nature of the theories, whether mine or others, concerning the origin of morality, or, more precisely, the origin of morality concerned me only as one means, among many, to an end. The issue for me was the value of morality, and on that point I had to confront, almost alone, my great teacher Schopenhauer, to whom my book was addressed as though he were still alive, for that book, with all its passion and veiled contradiction, was also a polemic. It concerned, in particular, the value of the altruistic instincts, the instincts of pity, self-denial, and self-sacrifice, which Schopenhauer had so persistently painted in golden hues, deified and etherealized, that eventually they appeared to him, as it were, as values in themselves, on the strength of which he uttered both to life and to himself his own no. Regarding these altruistic instincts, however, there spoke from within me a growing mistrust, a skepticism which reached deeper and deeper. In these instincts I began to see the great danger to mankind, its most sublime enticement and temptation. To what? To oblivion? In these instincts I began to see the beginning of the end, the halting, the weary glance back, the will turning against life, the onset of the final stages of disease meekly announcing itself. I realized that the morality of pity, which spread wider and wider, engulfing and infecting even philosophers, was the most sinister symptom of our European culture, which had already become sinister. I realized that it was the devious route along which that culture wended its way to a new Buddhism, a European Buddhism, nihilism. This exaggerated esteem in which modern philosophers have held pity is quite without precedent, for in the past philosophers were absolutely unanimous as to the worthlessness of pity. I need only mention Plato, Spinoza, La Rochefoucauld, and Kant. Four minds as different as can be, but united on one point, their contempt for pity. This problem of the value of pity, 6, and this problem of the value of pity and of the morality of pity, I am an opponent of our modern effeminate ways, our delicacy of feeling. seems at the first blush to be a mere isolated problem, a solitary question. But whoever pauses and ponders this problem and learns to ask questions will experience what I experienced. A new and immense vista unfolds before him. Its vast prospect staggers him. All sorts of doubt, mistrust, and fear well up within him. The belief in morality, indeed in all morality, totters. Finally, a new demand announces itself. Let us express this new demand. We need a critique of moral values. The value of these values is for the first time to be called into question, and for this purpose it is necessary to know the conditions and circumstances under which these values grew, evolved, and changed. We need to investigate morality as a result, as a symptom, as a mask, as tartuffery, as disease, as a misunderstanding, but also morality as a cause, as a remedy, as a stimulant, as a hindrance, as a poison, especially since up to the present time we have neither known nor even desired to know these things. The value of these values was taken for granted as a simple fact and as indisputable. No one has, up to the present, expressed the slightest doubt or hesitation in judging the good man to be of a higher value than the evil man, or of a higher value with regard specifically to human progress, welfare, and prosperity in general, not to mention the future. But what if we suppose the reverse were the truth? What then? Suppose there lurked in the good man a regressive trait, likewise a danger, a lure, a poison, a narcotic, by means of which the present lived at the expense of the future, perhaps in greater comfort and less danger, but also as pettier, meaner, so that morality would really be blamed if the human species were never to attain to its ultimate potential and magnificence. So that would really be the danger of dangers. 7. Suffice it to say that after this vista opened up before me, I had reason to search for learned, bold, and industrious colleagues, for whom I am still searching. The work involves exploring the immense, distant, and hidden realm of morality, a morality which has actually existed and has actually been practiced, examining it with fresh eyes, asking wholly new questions. And is this not tantamount to discovering that realm? If in this connection I thought of employing Dr. Ree, amongst others, as an assistant, I did so because I was convinced that from the very nature of his inquiries, he would have inevitably struck upon a superior approach to his investigation. Have I deceived myself in this? I wished at all events to point his eyes, so keen and impartial, in the right direction. I wished to direct him to the real history of morality, and to warn him, while there was yet time, against speculation in the English style. It is quite obvious which colour is 100 times more important than blue for a genealogist of morals, and of course what rises immediately to one's mind is the colour grey, by which I mean documentary evidence, that which is capable of definitive proof, that which has actually existed, or to put it briefly, the whole of that long hieroglyphic script, so hard to decipher, in which is inscribed the past history of human morals. Dr. Ree was quite unacquainted with this script, but he had read Darwin. And so in his philosophy, the Darwinian beast shakes hands politely with the demure moral weakling and dilettante, all too modern, who is tamed. Thus they greet one another in a fashion that is at least instructive, the latter exhibiting an expression of refined and good-humoured indolence, tinged with a touch of pessimism and exhaustion, as if one could hardly be expected to take all these things, I mean moral problems, so seriously, as doing so offers no reward. On the other hand, I think that there are no subjects which offer more reward if taken seriously. Part of that reward is that perhaps eventually they can even bring enjoyment. This enjoyment, indeed, or to use my own language, this gay science, is a reward for a protracted, brave, laborious, and profound earnestness, which, it goes without saying, is a trait that few possess. But on that day on which we say from the fullness of our hearts, forward, even our old morality is a fit material for comedy, we shall have discovered a new plot and a new possibility for the Dionysian drama entitled The Soul's Fate, and he will soon make good use of it. One can safely wager he, the great ancient eternal author of the comedy of our existence. 8. If anyone finds what is written here obscure or unintelligible, I do not think that the blame should lie upon me. The meaning should be clear enough to any reader who has first read my previous writings carefully, without sparing himself the effort needed to understand them, for that is not, indeed, a simple matter. Take, for instance, my Zarathustra. I cannot acknowledge that anyone really knows that book well, unless he has been either deeply wounded by it or deeply delighted by it at every point. Then and only then can he enjoy the privilege of participating with all due reverence in the halcyon element from which that work is born, and in its sunny brilliance, its grand scope, its composed assurance. In less capable hands, the aphoristic form may prove difficult, but this is only because this form is treated too casually today. An aphorism, if properly coined and cast into its final form, is far from being deciphered as soon as it has been read. On the contrary, it is only after this prelude that interpretation, properly speaking, begins. And of course, for that purpose, an art of interpretation is necessary. The third essay in this book furnishes an example of what in such cases I call interpretation. An aphorism is prefixed to that essay, whereas that which follows it is commentary. There is certainly something which is essential in order to practice reading as an art, something which has nowadays been forgotten. That is why it will take quite some time for my writings to become readable, and for this it is necessary to become almost a cow, and under no circumstances a modern man. Rumination. Sils Maria, Upper Engadin, July 1887.